Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Storie with Linda. My guest today, Dr. Galleh Jallow, is a professor of history, writer, and former editor for one of the most popular newspapers in the Gambia called the Daily Observer. He holds a PhD in African Studies from the University of California at Davis, a master's in liberal studies from Rutgers University, and a bachelor's in history and political science from Fourah College, the University of Sierra Leone in West Africa. He was asked to return home in 2018 to serve as executive secretary of the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparation Commission in the Gambia. Welcome, Dr. Jallow, to the Storie with Linda show. How are you?
Thank you, Linda. I'm good.
Good.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Curious, where are you calling in from today?
From Banjul, Gambia.
Banjul.
I'm in Gambia, yeah.
Lovely. You're a world traveler, so we have to know where you are today.
Well, I'm in Banjul.
Okay, so your history, your work, it's very vast. It cuts across many areas. So I'm going to try today for us to touch on some key parts of what you have done so far. Let's start with what I think you are most known for, at least globally, is serving as the executive secretary for the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission in the Gambia. For those who know nothing about the TRRC, what is it? Why was it set up? And what has been the outcome from that?
Well, thank you very much, Linda. The TRRC was a truth commission, and truth commissions have been around for quite some time. They actually began to gain currency, global currency, I would say, in the 80s in Latin America. And then you had some truth commissions in Africa and Asia. And they are normally created after either a period of conflict in a country or a period of authoritarianism. And in either case, there would have been a lot of human rights violations. So truth commissions essentially are created to dig into the past and bring out those human rights violations with a view to doing a number of things. One would be just to know the truth of what happened, to give victims the opportunity to come and narrate their stories, to give perpetrators, if they are willing, to come forward and confess their crimes and perhaps seek forgiveness. And so truth commissions have as their mandate, especially in our case, also in addition to seeking out the truth, to promoting reconciliation and paying reparations. At the end of the day, the whole idea behind truth commissions, and the TRRC is no exception, is to prevent a recurrence of human rights violations in that particular country, in that particular society. And so once the work is done, normally they are temporary bodies. Truth commissions are temporary. They could be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Ours was given 2 years, but we sought an extension for a number of months. Now, at the end of the day, what the Truth Commission does is to produce a historical record, a true historical record of what happened, the human rights violations that took place, but also to write a final report and offer recommendations to the government, recommendations on how to correct administrative and policy failures, but also how to ensure that the human rights violations that happened in the country do not happen again, and also recommendations on reconciliation, recommendations on giving victims recommendations on prosecutions of those found most responsible for human rights violations. So the TRRC was a truth commission in that model, in that mode. It was designed to create a true historical record, to produce a final report and recommendations to the government. And then the mandate would expire and the truth commission would fold. So that's essentially, in short, that's what a truth commission is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So I'm just curious, since you guys wrapped up, is there anything that is being implemented, or are there plans to implement anything in particular from your recommendations?
Yes, the TRRC finished its work in November, actually submitted the final report in November 2021. According to the law that set it up, the government was supposed to react to the report within 30 days. And they did that. They actually published the report on 24th of December 2021. And then 6 months later, in May 2022, they produced a white paper in which they accepted 263 of 265 recommendations. So they accepted essentially all the recommendations that the Truth Commission made, that the TRRC made to them. In terms of implementation, it has been slow. There has been movement. I think we are seeing some movement towards implementation, especially implementation of the recommendations on prosecutions, which are, of particular interest to the Gambian people and especially the victims. So we think that the government is moving slowly towards the implementation of the recommendations. We wish it were faster, but at least progress is being made.
Some movement is better than no movement, that's for sure.
Exactly so. Exactly.
So from a personal standpoint, and maybe you could speak to it from a professional standpoint too, what has been a big takeaway from you serving in that role and hearing all these stories and sitting with it?
Well, I had a lot of takeaways from my Truth Commission experience, but one thing that really shocked me and stands out for me is the fact that over 90%, I would say about 98 to 99% of victims of human rights violations were totally innocent of any crime whatsoever. Now, that was a shocker for me to realize. I realized that, perhaps 99 out of 100 people who suffered rape, who suffered torture, who suffered illegal detention, extrajudicial executions, disappearances, and so on and so forth, were totally innocent of any crime. But they were not given a chance to appear before any court of law. That's not how dictatorships work. They're like, just go get him, kill him, go get him, torture him, and that's what happened. So that is a big takeaway for me, that in most situations of human rights violations, the victims are largely innocent of any crime. And that was really, really shocking to me to realize.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that and for doing the important work in the Gambia. I know there are many other countries in Africa and around the world that probably need space like that and lessons like that. Let's shift a little bit to Professor Baba Jallow. You are a professor of history, so you love history. It's clear when I read your bio and your work, you love history, particularly African history. Why do you love history, and why should we care about history?
Well, why we care about history is that, the present and the future are both built on the past. If you don't know the past, you probably cannot build a very strong present foundation or a good future. And so, in the river of time, history is also a river. You have, we talk in terms of a river of history, a river of events. And so in order to understand the present, you have to understand the past. So there is always an element of the past in the present, and we use the past and the present combined to build the future. Now, in terms of my love for history, I don't know why I love history. History was my favorite subject from high school. When I was in high school, you couldn't beat me in history. So it was my favorite subject. And, I studied history and political science at the undergraduate level. When I came back to Gambia, I worked briefly for the National Council for Arts and Culture, just transcribing tapes and doing some historical research. And then I was, drawn to the West African Exams Council. I did not survive there because of the formal and very strict and box-like nature of the work. And so, I became a journalist. I went to the Daily Observer as a journalist. That too is a profession that I had a lot of passion for. And so what got me into doing history in historical studies, history in my doctoral studies, is that I wanted to understand why governments censor the media. Because I was a victim, I was a journalist, I was arrested several times, detained several times, and I would always say, what is behind this idea of censorship? Why do governments want to prevent people from expressing their opinions, from commenting on issues of national significance? And so when I went to the University of California to do my PhD in African history, I decided to do my doctoral dissertation research on censorship in Ghana. And so I was able to dig into, some of the thinking behind censorship.
Wow.
So essentially, that's what took me to, to that level of historical studies. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. I should mention that I too am a lover of history. When I was in secondary school in Cameroon, that
Right.
was my favorite subject.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, it's important.
Mm.
Like a true academic, like most academics, you have
Yes,
written
most
several
academics.
books.
Right.
But two in particular stand out to me. So I just want us to touch on those two today. The first
Sure.
one that I want to touch on, it's called The Graveyard Cannot Pray: One Man's Battle to Save His Daughter from Female Circumcision. The book is an autobiographical account of your struggle to stop your daughter from being taken into the bush for female circumcision, a practice that is considered very important in your culture, the Fulani culture, and in many cultures around Africa. What gave you the courage to go against the grain, and how did you deal with fears as you did that, if you had any fears?
Well, let's say it was a labor of love. I loved my daughter. And prior to having the daughter, I had done some research on female circumcision. I was a journalist at the time, and I had encountered, I actually did a little research project for UNICEF Gambia. Went into one of the regions to do about a 6-week study of female circumcision, the effects there, and the effects were just so horrible. And I was also privy to the research that was being done by GAMCOTRAP, the Gambia Committee on Traditional Practices, and they were bringing out horrible stories. As a news person in the newsroom, you will see all kinds of stories about how female circumcision is destroying and has destroyed the lives of women and young girls. Personally, I lost a cousin, my elder sister. She was a cousin. Our mothers shared the same mother and father. She died in childbirth. And I think that that it was a question, it was a result partly of female circumcision. And so by the time I got my daughter, I was already mentally prepared. I said, if I have a daughter, I will not allow her to be circumcised. And that's exactly what I did. I did some research and I realized that it wasn't an Islamic tradition as people held or continue to hold here, especially among the Fulani. They think it's a religious obligation. It is not a religious obligation. It is even not a sunnah, some kind of an example of the Prophet Muhammad, because the Prophet had daughters and they were not subjected to this practice. I also realized that female circumcision actually predated Islam. It was here. It existed before the advent of Islam. And so no one would tell me that it was an Islamic tradition. And when my daughter was born, I was ready to fight for about 6 years. I was getting ready mentally and physically to do what it takes to protect her from female circumcision, because it would destroy her life. Potentially, it could destroy her life. It could cause lifelong problems, all kinds of problems, that I thought it wasn't worth it. But I knew it was also madness to say no to female circumcision among the Fulani, a very, very, very conservative group of people, if you like. No one has ever, as far as I know, among the Fulani, said, no, my daughter is not going to be circumcised. I probably was the first person to do it among the Fulani. And it was tough.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
I
a
had no
man,
fears.
and a man doing it.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
how did you I guess I'm asking for maybe other people who are watching and maybe wanting to also speak out like you.
Yeah.
How did you navigate the resistance? Did you explain to people like, hey, this is not an Islamic tradition? Like, what were some tools that you used to succeed in your endeavor?
Well, excuse me. The first tool was that I got a call. My family lives in Farafenya, which is about 200 miles from Banjul. I was in my office. I was editing the Daily Observer at the time. And my wife called me around 5 p.m. One day and said, well, Baba, your dad is planning to take, and it was my dad. It was, in the Fulani tradition, the men actually have all kinds of authority. Your dad is planning to take Ramatulai, the little girl, to circumcision, and she knows my position. She knew my position about female circumcision, and she called me and said, your dad is going to take her. And I'm like, I can't go now because it's 200 miles away. You have to cross a ferry. By the time I get to the ferry, just next to the town, the ferry would have closed. The ferry at the time closed at 9 p.m. And so there was no way I could get to Farafenye at that point. So what I did was I called my dad, and I said, if you circumcise my daughter, I'm going to kill myself. And then I just hung up the phone. He called and called and called. I didn't take it. He went to a friend of mine and said, come and talk to this guy. I think he's crazy. And the guy called me and I repeated the same thing. I said, if they take my daughter to the bush, I am going to kill myself. And so that's one of the arguments that I held on to, and I never let go. For 2 years, this battle ran along for 2 years. The other argument was that it wasn't an Islamic requirement. It wasn't required by Islam for Muslims to take their children to circumcision. Now, third, they told me, the elders, we had several meetings, to trust this thing out. And I would always ask the elders, is this a Muslim Islamic tradition? And they would say, no, it's not. It's not an Islamic tradition. It is just a preferred tradition. It's just preferred that we do it, and it's part of our culture. And I'm like, okay, if it is part of our culture, but it is harmful to this girl, this little helpless girl, it would destroy her life forever, then I'm not going to let my daughter to be circumcised. So that was the second point that I made. One, that it was, and I would kill myself. Two, it is not an Islamic tradition. Three, if it is just a tradition and it is harmful, there is no point in doing it.
Right.
And then so the fourth point that I had was that my wife is a Wolof. She is a Wolof woman. And so I said to my dad, okay, so if you care so much about the purity of women who are circumcised, why did you allow me to marry a Wolof woman? Because he had to bless the marriage, before it happened. I said, her mom is not circumcised. So, why suddenly we want to have my daughter circumcised? So these were the four main points. These were the four weapons in my arsenal. The threat of suicide, the argument that it's not a Muslim tradition, three, that it is very harmful, it could destroy the life of the child, and four, that, if you guys care so much, why did you let me marry a woman who is not circumcised? So yeah, so I held on to that.
You definitely had a toolbox, that's for sure.
Yes.
A toolbox.
Yeah.
Can I just appreciate what you just said about it was a 2-year battle? Because often we think, oh, maybe it was a week or two, or maybe a month of argument, and then everybody came on your side. I think it's really important for audiences to know that some of these battles take a long time, and it's not easy, but you won at the end of the day. So thank you for sharing that story.
You're welcome.
I wanted to turn to your second book, The Letters of J.B. Dankwa. It's a collection of letters from Dr. J.B. Dankwa, a Ghanaian politician, scholar, lawyer, and freedom fighter for Ghana's independence while he was imprisoned by the Kwame Nkrumah regime. And when I was reading the book, I got really sad. That's the word, sad, because Kwame Nkrumah is a Pan-Africanist that a lot of us hold in high respect. And to read the letters of his fellow colleague who eventually died in prison, basically under his watch, was really disheartening. And I guess I want to ask you, maybe it's a little therapy session for me this morning. Is this a case of you shouldn't meet your heroes? Am I experiencing a case of you shouldn't meet your heroes?
Well, I think so. Unfortunately, there are many people like you, not in a bad way, but a lot of people who know Kwame Nkrumah just know his very good side. You know,
Yeah.
he was a very staunch nationalist. He was a great Pan-Africanist. He did a lot of Pan-African work. You know, he participated greatly in the formation of the OAU, which became the AU now. But there are two other sides to Kwame Nkrumah that people don't know. And the prison letters of J.B. Dankwa actually show one of those sides, which is that he had some serious dictatorial tendencies. Now, the J.B. Dankwa was the guy who invited Nkrumah back from the UK. At the time, they had a party, and then, you know, they invited Nkrumah. He paid for Kwame Nkrumah's price, you know, fare from the UK back to Ghana. And then, you know, he asked him to be Secretary General of the UGCC, which was Dankwa's party that he created. That was in 1948. In 1949, you know, Kwame Nkrumah broke away from the UGCC and founded the Convention People's Party, the CPP, and then went on, you know, because of his firebrand brand of politics, he was able to mobilize the Ghanaian people and win independence. So the UGCC became an opposition party to Kwame Nkrumah. But then the year after independence, Ghana gained independence in 1957. In 1958, Kwame Nkrumah, in June, Kwame Nkrumah passed the Preventive Detention Act. Now, the Preventive Detention Act allowed his government to arrest and jail anybody, put anybody in prison without charges, without even knowing what you have done, for up to 7 years. You know, and so J.B. Dankwa was arrested on 2 occasions under that law. On the second occasion, he was incarcerated at Nsawam prisons, and then, you know, he kept writing, protesting his innocence, writing petitions to the government, writing petitions to Kwame Nkrumah. He was subjected, as you know, to a lot of humiliating treatment, and eventually he died of heart attack. He just couldn't take it anymore, and he collapsed and died in prison. And so that is what the story of J.B. Dankwa is. And I thought, when I found this material in the archives, that this is a story that needs to be known, because it is a little known fact, or a little accepted fact among Africanist circles. There are some Africanist historians who don't want to see anything negative about Nkrumah. And, you know, but that is not fair. You cannot distort history. You cannot just tell the pleasant side of somebody's history. You also, you know, you want to make a holistic picture. You know, and so, yeah, it was a very tragic situation regarding J.B. Dankwa.
Yeah, very, very tragic. And, you know, as I reflect on it, you know, people will say all of us have good sides. We're not all considered angels to everybody, you know. So, yeah, it's human nature, I guess.
Yeah, it is human nature, but it is avoidable, you know. It was avoidable because, you know, the laws that the law that Nkrumah used to, the Preventive Detention Act, was actually an importation from the colonial period. It was an Emergency Powers Act from the colonial period, 1948 Emergency Powers Act, that he brought in and tweaked a little bit, you know, and used as the Preventive Detention Act. So that is inexcusable. You cannot do that. However good you are, allow people to express their opinions. You know, by that action, you know, he launched Ghana into a generation, 25 years of military coups and counter coups. From 1966, when he was overthrown, to 1991, Ghana was in turmoil. It was only after the Fourth Republic in 1991 that Ghana started finding its feet.
There's a very important point you make about oppression, and how the oppressed can become the oppressors, particularly for Africa, that we have experienced oppression for centuries. I think it's so important for us to begin to do that reflection, healing, and cleansing, because we copy the behaviors and the acts of the oppressors, and we put it upon our fellow brothers and sisters. And I don't know if we as Africans are really doing enough reflection and digging into how the oppressions have been ingrained in us and how we're inflicting it upon each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, some very, very interesting twist happened with Nkrumah and with all the independence era African leaders, or most of them. Some of them avoided the trap. Now, once Nkrumah and the other nationalist leaders started clamoring for independence, The Europeans had one refrain for us, for the Africans, and they would say, you Africans are not ready for self-governance.
Mm-hmm.
You're not ready, you are not capable of building up democratic societies, if you like. You are not capable of ruling yourselves. And nationalist leaders would say, no, you are wrong. We can't be democratic. We are all human. We are intelligent enough. So the Europeans had what we call in African history, a European exceptionalism towards Africa, saying that the Africans, cannot rule themselves. Now, once the nationalist leaders won independence, including Nkrumah himself, they turned that concept on its head. So you now have a neo-exceptionalism where the African leaders are saying, no, we are Africans, these Western forms of governance are not suitable for Africa. And so they turned the argument on its head. And so rather than open up the democratic space, develop the minds of the people, enable the people to take care of their own countries, their own destinies, they actually repressed dissent and repressed and closed up the space and clung on to power. That is the genesis of all of the coups, all of the civil wars, all of the authoritarianism, and the mess that we have in Africa today. They never gave the people the chance to grow.
That's right. And we are still seeing a lot of coups today. Maybe a discussion for another day, Professor.
Right.
I have two last questions for you. I wanted to congratulate you on your most recent appointment as the inaugural Roger D. Fisher Fellow in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution at the Harvard University Law School. What are your hopes and goals for that position?
Well, thank you very much. The FISA fellowship was some kind of a surprise to me, a pleasant surprise though. But essentially, it is designed to uphold and promote the legacy of Professor Roger Fisher, who was a long-standing professor at Harvard Law School. He taught there, I think, for about 40 years. He started the program on negotiation. He wrote a lot of books and articles on the art of negotiation and conflict resolution. He was a man of peace. He wanted to promote peace in the world. He even participated in bringing an end to apartheid in South Africa. And so I guess one of my key tasks would be how to keep that legacy of peacemaking, negotiation, conflict resolution that was so dear to Professor Fisher alive at Harvard University and in the world. So a lot of things would happen. I think we might have something like a Fisher Memorial Lecture to be given by various people. Definitely a lot of writing and hopefully publishing of works on African history, but also on conflict and negotiation and transitional justice. So everything is up in the air right now, but that is really the idea. We need to just, the position was created just to keep up the legacy of Professor Fisher, and I'll do whatever I can to make sure that happens and to build a strong foundation for future Fisher Fellows. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Congratulations. We'll be following that journey in your writings and publications.
Thank you. Thank you.
My last question is for our audience, who I'm sure are so captivated by everything you've shared today, and who may want to keep up with your work and your efforts. How should they go about that? Are there mediums where they can subscribe to and stay up to date with your engagements?
Well, for now, the only medium I have is my Facebook page.
Okay.
A Facebook page. I also started an organization after the end of the Truth Commission. It's called the Never Again Network. And essentially, the Never Again Network, we have a Facebook page.
Okay.
And essentially, the idea is to continue the outreach, the conversation about how to prevent dictatorship, what Gambians should know in order to be able to prevent dictatorship. So if they subscribe to those, if they follow those two pages, they should be able to keep up until we have a more formal platform for whatever. Yes, yeah.
It's a good start.
Yeah, it is.
It's a good start. Well, thank you so much, Professor Baba Galleh Jallow. It's been such a pleasure. You really are a baobab with so much knowledge. And we're blessed that we got a little bit of it today. We'll definitely keep up with your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation. It's my pleasure. Thank you.